The sun had not yet touched the ceiling of the courtroom when Judge Isidora Bracamonte slipped in without a sound, small against the light that leaked through the blinds. Her hat pressed into the crook of one arm and a little slate board under the other. The murmur from the street rose like steam. 7 lives, they shouted, and the hero's name itself seemed to shrink into the wood of the benches, as if the room had heard it 1,000 times and never knew on which side to put it. Sheriff Alderete, with dark circles like an old mine, cleared a path through the onlookers and brought in the man who split the town in two, Simon Barragan, broad-shouldered, dark waistcoat, a smile that begged for dust to stay white. "Your Honor, the accused," said interpreter Evaristo Lugo, his voice tempered, his mustache freshly groomed. He himself took Isidora's hat, hung it up without really seeing it, and waited for her to raise her hand. She did not speak. She only made a gesture, 2 fingers like a knife, then an open palm. Evaristo translated, "Silence in the court." A nervous silence fell in stumbling chunks. Remedios Salcedo, widow of the engineer killed at the exit of the old shaft, lifted her chin from the front bench, knuckles pale around a black handkerchief. Behind her, a boy under the brim of a borrowed hat, Matias Rios, hunched his neck. His eyes bounced around the walls, and always came back to Isidora's fingers, as if there were a thread in them. Lázaro Quijano, roving journalist, sharpened his pencil, smelled ink, and leaned in to record the legend the town wanted to keep. That the hero had come back from another fight for them, and now was paying because those in charge could not stand men who did not belong to them. Isadora set the slate board flat on the table, and struck once with the gavel. Brief, the wood sounding like well-mannered thunder. Evaristo said, "Preliminary hearing in the case of Remedios Salcedo versus Simón Barragán, alias 7 Lives, for the death of Don Ulpiano Salcedo, is now open." A buzz ran through the room. Someone hissed, "Slander." Another said, "Example," and the sheriff cleared his throat with a fatigue that came from the bone. Simón smiled, as if it had nothing to do with him. "With the court's leave, Your Honor," he said, looking not at the judge, but at her shadow on the wall. "I'll let myself be judged, but not by hands tied to Don Arcadio Mena." The room answered with a murmur full of anger. Isadora raised the finger. Evaristo translated without ceremony. "No one is above the law." Simón let out a laugh cracked at the edges. "In this county, the law is a tired horse, and whoever rides it is the one with golden spurs." Remedios leaned forward, handkerchief pressed to her mouth. "My husband didn't play with horses," she said, her voice low and steady. "He worked with plans and numbers. He didn't deserve to be ambushed at the exit and silenced." The boy Matias looked at the floor. With the corner of his eye, Evaristo searched for Isadora's hand. She brushed his wrist. 1 tap, 3, a pause. The sign for "let him talk, let him empty himself." Evaristo breathed and said, "The defense will have its opportunity." Simón tilted his head. "I didn't kill anyone. That gentleman tripped over hard people, and I'm no hangman. I stop bullets, I don't hand them out. Ask the town." The murmurs rose again like moths to a lantern. Isadora did not blink. Her very dark eyes moved from the hero to the widow to the boy to the sheriff to the wall clock where the second hand moved its own tongue. "Witness," said Evaristo without anyone seeing her fingers. "Matias Rios." The boy shrank. Remedios nudged him gently. "Walk on, mijo." Matias approached the stand like someone crossing a field where lead had once fallen. His fingers pulled nervously at the hat string. "Tell us what you saw," asked Evaristo, but the boy froze. Isadora turned the slate toward him, and with a short piece of chalk, drew a circle with a dot inside, a sign the two of them had invented in the anteroom during the months of waiting. The place it meant. And Matias pressed his lips together, understanding. She made another stroke, 3 lines cutting the circle like spokes. The time. Matias moved his hands, clumsy but sure. Isadora followed his language as if reading the wind. Evaristo tried to follow her. Isadora touched his forearm to set the rhythm, and he translated. He saw two men waiting for Don Ulpiano here by the signpost of the old shaft. One was smoking. The other had a watch. Sheriff Alderete asked, incredulous against his will. Isadora lifted her eyebrows. Matthias went on. He took it out 3 times, pressed the lid with his thumb. It didn't work right. And the hero, someone from the back, burst out. Simon? Evaristo looked at Isadora, her paws spelled with her fingers. Slow question, let the boy choose. Matthias looked at Simon, the way you look at a portrait that suddenly breathes. He shook his head. Simon spread his arms. See? The boy went on, pointing with his eyes. The ones who were waiting wore canvas jackets with leather patches here. He touched his own shoulder. Remedios jolted. Her husband had drawn that detail in a notebook that Isadora kept, the mark of a crew that worked for Don Arcadio Mena, the owner of the shafts. The name floated in the room without anyone speaking it. Simon, quick, stepped in. Your Honor, yes, those are Mena's men, but don't confuse things. I've taken men from Mena. If Ulpiano messed with the boss's accounts, that's not my business. Accounts? Asked Evaristo, and his voice in the room was the voice of Isadora's hands. Those who cut silver, cut paper, Simon said with half a smile. And if an engineer counts what he shouldn't, he wakes shadows. Isadora noticed the throb in the hero's neck. His voice wasn't shaking, but his pulse had jumped when he said shadows. She made a quick mark on the slate, the sign in their language that meant hole. Evaristo understood. The judge is asking you, Mr. Barragan, why you're protecting those who might have killed Ulpiano. I'm not protecting anyone, Simon said, and for the first time he looked straight at Isadora, as if behind her silence there was a coal. I'm protecting the people. If they bring down the strongman, they'll come for the rest. Remedios straightened up. My husband was part of that people you say you protect. Simon lowered his gaze for a second, brief as a passing cloud. Let it be on record, he added. I stopped 2 strangers the night before. They came looking for trouble. I got them out of Remedios' ranch so they wouldn't make a mess. Ask the sheriff. Alderete raised his hands. He stopped a brawl, yes, but we weren't there when Ulpiano was killed. Isadora drew again, a triangle with a dot at each vertex. Evaristo hesitated, looked at his hand, understood. The judge wants 3 things: the watch, the jacket, and the trail of money. Simon snorted. Ask Don Arcadio's permission first. He'll show you anything you want, except what matters. The second hand ticked on. Isadora didn't smile. Her mouth traced a thin line. She struck the gavel. Evaristo, the court orders a visit to the old shaft and to Miss Mena's office. Sheriff, you will lead the way. Lazaro Quijano scribbled. Mute judge orders entry into the cacique's kingdom. His pen creaked. When they stepped out, the heat bounced off the stones, and the dust stuck to their bones like an obligation. Don Arcadio Mena was waiting in the doorway of his office with a broad-brimmed hat and a cane that seemed to touch the floor with contempt. Your Honor, he said, bowing just enough. My house is the house of the law. Come in. Evaristo returned the gesture with words that Isadora barely signaled. Brief courtesy, not deference. The judge thanks you, he said, and requests to see the payroll books and the explosive records for the last week. Don Arcadio smiled without showing teeth. Explosives? In times of drought, dynamite is dearer than a doctor. We watch every cent of that expense. Precisely, Evaristo translated. Mena led them to a long table covered with maps. His fingers measured distances and curves fast, like someone who has drawn the world so no one can leave it. Isadora laid her hand on the edge of one map. She felt the roughness of the paper where someone had scrubbed hard. Something wrong? Mena asked sweetly. Isadora pointed at the faint smear. Mena shrugged. A mistake. It was corrected. The sheriff opened a payroll ledger. Names written by the same hand, broad and slanted. And between lines, tiny crosses next to Foreman Rendon, Foreman Villamil. Isadora drew 2 crosses and then an oval on the slate. Evaristo, 2 foremen were paid double on the day of the murder. Mena tilted his head. People who work before the sun comes up get paid twice, Your Honor. If you wish, I'll introduce you to the accountant. The accountant was not there. He went out to check slips, said an old man without looking at them. Isadora walked over to a display case. Behind the glass, a pocket watch lay on velvet, its lid dented at the hinge. Mena stood beside her, hands on his cane. "A gift from my late wife," he said, his voice a thread, resenting anyone putting eyes on his things. "It doesn't run like it used to, but it's worth what it remembers." Isadora's slight finger gesture was open. Evaristo voiced it. "The judge asks to see it." Mena hesitated, then finally opened the case and took out the watch. As he pressed the lid, his thumb made a series of clicks. 2 sharp, 1 dull. Isadora saw under his nail a blackish line embedded down to the base, small and vertical, as if a splinter had long made its home there. She recalled Matthias's hand sketching that same insistent pressing, and her own stomach clenched. She flashed a different sign to her interpreter, quick, meaning careful. It was not the watch, it was the nail. Evaristo held his tongue in time. "Pretty piece," he said only. Old Mena put it away. "I've always liked watches that close when they should," he said. They stepped back out into the light that cut their eyes. The old shaft greeted them like a mouth wanting to tell them its secret. "Here," whispered Remedios, not quite praying. "This is where they left him." There was nothing left but wheel tracks and a splintered post. The sheriff kicked at the dirt and lifted a strand of waxed cord. They tied something up. Isadora crouched, her dress picking up dust to the knee. She saw, almost invisible, a pale residue clinging to a stone. She touched it with the tip of her pencil. It was not ash, it was something finer. She brought the pencil to her nose, a faint metal smell, sweet and sickly. Evaristo watched her. She wrote on the slate, bent over it. Slurry, he understood. Amalgam. "A load came out through here," he said aloud, "and not through the main gate." The sheriff nodded. If someone hid silver, they wanted it to look like a robbery and not a settling of scores. Lazaro noted it down as if he were the one digging. On the way back, the street already knew what no one had said. That the widow was pointing at Mena and the town at Simon, and that the mute judge had set foot on ground where nothing grows but debt. That night, Isadora stayed alone in the empty courtroom with the phonograph Lazaro had hauled in from his cart to record interviews. She approached the machine, rapped the brass horn with her knuckles, and felt in the wood the murmur of old voices. Her tongue, that still stone since she was a girl, weighed like a secret. Evaristo came in on cat feet. "You won't sleep tonight," he said, not asking. She shook her head and made a gesture that was half stay and half listen. She pointed at Ulpiano's notebook, which Remedios had given her with a widow's hands, numbers with teeth, and a torn-out page that left the mark of a ragged cut. She wrote, "Powder missing and foreman paid." Evaristo rubbed his forehead. "If we pull on that rope, the whole house comes down on us." She drew a lock and then a key. Evaristo looked at her and saw behind those scribbles a sleepless patience. "A confession," he said, "but from whom?" "Shh!" Isadora didn't look at the ceiling or close her eyes. She looked at the phonograph and then at the wall clock. Then, with a gesture that was memory and knife, she traced in the air with her finger the line of a nail, vertical. Evaristo opened his mouth, shut it, ran a hand over his mustache. "It's his," he whispered, without naming him. The next morning, the room was overflowing before the sun itself. Mena, with his cane, sat in the back. A smile thin as the blade of a knife, used not for meat, but for paper. Simon arrived in a clean shirt. Sweat glistened at Remedios' temples beneath her scarf. Matthias clutched a little bag of marbles that tinkled almost imperceptibly. Isadora raised an eyebrow. That sound reminded her of the watch's click, 3 hits and a dull one. She struck the gavel. "Evaristo, we resume." The judge shaped a question with her hand, no verb, a net, inviting something in. Evaristo gave it words. "Mr. Barragan, what do you know about the double pay to 2 foremen the week of the crime?" Simon looked not at the judge, but at Mena. I know they buy loyalty when theirs runs thin. And do you sell yours? Asked Evaristo, using the tone that always came from one of Isadora's signs, which left room for a lie to trap itself. Simon clenched his jaw. I buy time. Time for whom? For the ones breathing behind me. The bench creaked beneath Remedios. Breathing is no excuse, she said without raising her voice. And those words, coming from someone who had buried a man, sank in crooked and stayed. Simon lowered his eyes and spoke slowly, as if each syllable hurt in a muscle that had no name. I went to see Ulpiano the afternoon before. I told him to watch his papers. I told him it wasn't the time to count other people's silver. I said it because they asked me to. Who? The murmur vibrated. The clock's second hand carved a hollow. Simon swallowed. Rendon, the foreman, Mena's man, smiled more openly now, like someone enjoying a play who thinks he knows the ending. And what else? Insisted Evaristo, guided by Isadora's fingers, now like arrows. Rendon asked me to scare him. No guns. Just so he understands those numbers aren't his, he said. Did you scare him? I tried. Ulpiano called me a coward. He told me he'd keep the paper where not even the devil could find it. Simon drew breath. I left. And the next day? The next day he was already dead. Your Honor, a man from the back broke in. This is admitting that our Simon got his boots dirty so we wouldn't drown. It's no crime to be a shield. It is when the shield is a hand, said Evaristo, not looking to see who had spoken, because Isadora held his wrist. Her pulse was in his, steady. Mr. Barragan, he added, did you know that Rendon and Villamil were paid double that day? Simon closed his eyes for a heartbeat. I found out later. After what? After being called a coward for keeping silent. The room, which till then had been holding Simon up, faltered like a horse smelling a scorpion. Isadora let the silence nail everyone's feet to the floor. Matias, in the front row, rolled 2 marbles. The sound was almost identical to the watch's click with its dirty nail. Mena, without meaning to, looked at his own hand. With the smallest gesture, Isadora pointed to the boy. Evaristo understood. Matias, did the watch sound like this? The boy nodded, moved his fingers. 3 and 1. Whose was it? Matias looked at Mena and then at the floor. He shrank. Isadora brought her slate closer. She wrote, "See nail?" The boy brushed his own thumb, drew a line. Like this? Said Evaristo. The boy nodded. Mena cleared his throat. Your Honor, he said with pressing courtesy, let's not drag children's fantasies into this room. My hands are clean of bar brawls. Isadora looked at him as you look at a closed door from the inside. She rose slowly, took Lazaro's phonograph, set it on her table, turned the crank, and then signaled to Evaristo with her fingers, like a telegraph. Invite him to speak. Evaristo smiled in a way that showed no teeth. Don Arcadio, he said, the people always learn when the men who hold it up tell their days. Would you say a few words for those who will come after? The judge wants to record the good work of your enterprise with the widow present. The journalist's eyes widened. It wasn't just a trap, it was a mirror. Mena wasn't going to miss the chance to display his uprightness before his little nation. With pleasure, he said, and his voice tried to rise over the room. He leaned toward the phonograph horn, as if approaching an altar, set down his cane, clasped his hands. This county, he declared, breathes by the metal we pull out with blood and discipline. I, Arcadio Mena, give work. I support school and table, and I will not allow anyone to smear me with stories. The machine hummed. The needle scratched the wax. Lazaro held his breath. Isadora made the go-on sign. Evaristo asked, what happened on the day Don Ulpiano died? We worked as any other day, said Mena, except that one man got distracted counting numbers he shouldn't. I don't like anyone tallying another man's house. Did you know before or after? I always know. And what did you do? I sent. Mena stopped, blinked, corrected himself. I told Rendon to settle the matter with respect. In the end, an engineer can make a mistake. The wall clock swallowed 3 seconds. Isadora, motionless, caught the shadow of the verb settle. Before his mouth skimped on it, Evaristo pressed. "Settle where?" "At the old shaft," he said without thinking, then smiled with all the teeth he had not shown before, as if turning the word into a joke, because there was less dust there. The room breathed differently. Remedios closed her eyes for a second and then opened them dry. Simon dipped his head a fraction, accepting without knowing what he was accepting. Matias rolled a marble. Watch click. Isadora raised her hand. Wanting one last taut strand, Evaristo, obedient to a stroke of her finger, said, "Do you remember what the man with Rendon was wearing?" So Mena blinked. "Does it matter? History likes to dress precisely. A canvas jacket with a patch," Mena let slip, "like we wear so as not to tear our shoulders when we pull the winch." The silence twisted like wire. Evaristo smiled without light. "Thank you. It's on the record." Only then did Mena see his own footprint in the mud he'd wished to stay dry. "I withdraw my statement," he said, his voice trying to walk back along the wax. Isadora shook her head gently. Her hand drew in the air a judge's no, which was different from the world's no. Simon lowered his chin without triumph. "Your Honor," he said, and didn't finish. His breathing shifted. Isadora held his gaze until the rest of the room ceased to exist for anyone looking at her. She made a gesture Evaristo needed no translation for. It was a taut rope going slack. "Say it," he said. Simon swallowed. "I did scare Opiano, yes. I went to his house. I yelled. I gave him a shove. I regretted it. I left. I swear on my mother. I didn't kill him. The ones who waited for him the next day were Mena's men. Rendon and another I didn't see face on. I was a coward and kept quiet. If I have to go to jail so the ones who gave the orders will talk, I'll go." The murmur held both pity and anger. Remedios looked at him without pity and without hate. "Then talk," she said. "Talk with names." "Rendon," Simon repeated, and swallowed the second name. Mena banged his cane on the floor. "Slander," he shouted. The sheriff moved forward, hand on his holster. Tension filled the room with the noiseless noise of a shot not yet fired. Two men at the back, in canvas jackets, stood up. "Sit down," Alderete said. One sat. The other hesitated, hand near his belt. Isadora did not move. She signaled to Evaristo. "No weapons in a temple." "Here," he said, voice firm. "No one drags the law down to the floor." There was a second in which anything could have happened. Without thinking, Matias dropped all his marbles. They bounced over the floor with a song of stone and metal, and that scattered clicking broke the spell. The man in the jacket let his hand fall. Alderete stepped in and cuffed him with a speed no tiredness could steal. Mena did not shout now. He flicked an almost invisible gesture toward the door. No one moved. Outside, as if someone had chalked an order in the sky, 3 bell chimes sounded from the little chapel, a call the town used for fire and assembly. Isadora had asked Remedios the night before to speak to the sacristan. The judge without voice knew how to make buildings speak. The people crowded closer without leaving, as if to say the stage was theirs. Evaristo, guided, concluded, "Given what we have heard, this court finds grounds to order the arrest of Foreman Rendon and Villamil, and to hold Simon Barragan on charges of aggravated coercion and obstruction of justice." A separate case is opened against the Mena Company for possible diversion of funds and cover-up. Mena laughed from the side of his mouth. "Cover-up? Without the governor's consent, no one enters my strongbox." Isadora lifted the slate and for the first time in the entire proceeding drew no symbol at all. She wrote in round, brief letters 3 witness names, and underneath, in firm chalk, the word decree. Evaristo read it out. "By authority of the district, the payroll and explosives records are hereby seized for review. Whoever alters or removes them will be held in custody." "I don't sign papers from a woman," Mena said, but his eyes avoided the phonograph. Isadora wiped the chalk off with her palm, flour on her skin, and looked at him like you look at a man who does not know something basic. that writing needs no permission to be true. That afternoon, a fine dust rain fell that neither wet nor shaded. Alderate and 2 deputies went into Mena's office with the warrant dirty with chalk. They pulled out drawers. They found the torn-out page from Ulpiano's notebook, still with its irregular bite. They found powder receipts signed twice, a list of advances to R and V, and at the bottom of a toolbox, a pocket watch with its hinge newly forced, the edge of the lid filed down so it would close better. Mena watched them lay everything out as if seeing the skeleton of his pride on a table. "Those papers prove nothing but my meticulousness," he said, unmoving. Isadora, the piece in her hand, brought the watch to her ear. She opened it. Click, 3 and 1. She closed it. The same sound the boy had threaded with marbles. Time itself had come as a witness. "Your Honor," said Simon, who did not take his eyes off the watch, as if in that metal lay the answer to a question he had asked himself too many times. "Let me say something in front of him." Evaristo looked at Isadora. She thought about how much strain the rope could take. Moved her hand. Yes, but in the courtroom. Back before everyone, the town breathing from the walls, the phonograph waiting. Simon stood in the middle and looked at Mena through the bronze horn as if the boss's voice had to become a thing so it wouldn't slip away again. "Don Arcadio," he said, "you used me like a scarecrow. You asked me to make noise so a man would put a paper away. That paper disappeared. Where is it?" Mena gripped the back of his cane. "Your words are wind. The paper exists. Remedios cut in from the front row, and right now the least expected person has it." Her eyes locked on Matias. The boy shrank, not from fear, but something like shame. Isadora had not forgotten Simon's phrase. He'd keep it where not even the devil could find it. A boy who plays in every yard, who fits in every kitchen. Seeing the spark in her fingers, Evaristo leaned toward Remedios. "Where did Ulpiano put it?" "On a plate," the widow said, drawing a deep breath. "In flour. The only plate that never went into the cupboard because it was crooked. I took it to the church, to the meal for the poor, so it wouldn't come back to the house again. I asked the sacristan to hang it as decoration." Nervous laughter shivered through the room. The truth, sometimes, hid like a joke. Evaristo sent for the sacristan, and he brought the plate, still with a white layer stuck to the ceramic. Isadora set it on its edge, tapped it with her knuckle, and a thin envelope slid down and fell onto the table like a tired bird. Lazaro, who until then had been writing as if chasing a stubborn mule, froze, pencil in midair. Isadora opened the envelope slowly. Inside were numbers and a letter in Ulpiano's own hand. "If I lose my breath, know that the silver left by the old shaft on Tuesday, with powder charged in the name of school. The foremen were paid to keep quiet. The boss said settle it. I heard right. The crooked signature." Mena let out a laugh that wanted to be scorn, but sounded like a hangover. "A letter is no oath," he said. The phonograph stood there, and the wax held the settle that had come from his mouth. Isadora, who had no voice, did have an ear for the weight of words. She made a gesture like tying a knot. Evaristo spoke. "With this document and the recording, the court orders the arrest of Arcadio Mena for cover-up and conspiracy to obstruct justice. You are remanded into custody." There was a scuffle, a table creaked, a hand went to a belt. Alderete Swift shoved Mena against the bench and snapped on the cuffs with the stubborn skill of a man who tires but does not quit. The 2 men in jackets tried to get to their feet. The people themselves, with their bodies, moved between them and the door, not with fury, but with weight, and nothing happened that a child could not tell without nightmares. Mena spat on the floor where no soul would step. "You haven't won," he said. "Either way, the strong man stays." He jerked his chin towards Simon. "That dog owes me obedience." Simon closed his eyes and opened them with another look. "You owe me your word," he said. "I paid it with silence. Today, I collect it with my name." He turned to Isadora. "Your Honor, I confess my part. I raised dust to cover fear. I pushed where I should have held. For that, I give myself up. But I'll testify against him." Isadora held him in a stillness that lit up. Evaristo was about to speak, but she raised her index finger. No rush. She thought about what weight example carried, about children who, like her, had learned to speak in other ways. She lifted the gavel and let it fall once. The confession of coercion is accepted, Evaristo translated, and a reduced sentence is granted in exchange for full and truthful testimony. Remedios bowed her head. Neither forgiveness nor condemnation, just a place to set her grief. The long trial would come later, with papers, mule routes, accounts to settle, names dragged out of holes. But that afternoon, the play ended with everyone standing. Lazaro wrote the headline with no flourish. The judge without a voice made the hero confess and recorded the master. The news fit in anyone's mouth, and that made it simple and dangerous. 3 days later, with Nena in a cold adobe cell, Simón on remand, Rendón and Villamil in irons, the courtroom smelled of new wax. Isadora, on her feet, looked at the phonograph like a household animal that had suddenly learned to guard the home. Evaristo read her gaze. Satisfied? She made a small gesture, one she did not use for the world. It was for herself. Neither victory nor relief. More a "this is how it ought to be." Alderete came in with the gait of a man dragging his boots on the inside. "Letter from the governor," he announced to the room. "He complains about the seizure, then congratulates us on transparency, finally asks for reports." Evaristo smiled with half a mustache. Politics. Isadora held out her hand for the letter. She read it with her eyes, not her voice, folded it precisely and set it on the table, in a straight line with the gavel. She looked at the dismantled gallows in the yard, plank by plank. She had ordered it taken down that morning. There would be no rope hanging from the sky while the town was learning to speak with proof. On her way out, Remedios was waiting by the door, the way you wait for someone who brings water. "Thank you," she said, plain. Isadora shook her head with one hand that said, "You owe me nothing," and with the other, just for a second, touched the woman's shoulder, a gesture that needed no language. Behind her, Matias showed her the marble bag. "I'm giving them back," he said clumsily, in his own way. She shook her head. "Keep them," she wrote in the air with her finger, and the boy understood. Lazaro took the photograph he had been putting off until then. The judge, the widow, the boy, the sheriff, the interpreter. No one quite smiled. They weren't sad either. It was the face of a place that had decided dust was no excuse not to wash things. That night, Isadora went back alone to the courtroom and set the needle on the wax. She listened to Mena puff himself up and fall in his own word. Listened to Simón say "coward" without excuses. Listened to Evaristo hold up each syllable she could not breathe. She turned the machine off, put the cylinder in a box she labeled in her own hand, slow and firm. Voice of the people. Salcedo case. She sat down, looked at her hands, remembered the mine where, as a child, a thief no one ever chased had smothered her throat with the filthy edge of a rag and left her under a drilling table. There was no blood worth recalling here, only dust on her tongue and a silence that, since then, had learned shapes. Today, that silence had handed down a sentence. It was no genius and no miracle. It was craft. Outside, the town was adjusting to a new sound, that of the old shaft closed off, and the mule track sealing over like a wound no one had known how to see before. From his cell, Simón asked for paper. He wanted to write to someone he owed nothing, but to whom he did owe one truth, the son of a laborer who had grown up seeing him as a statue. "Statues don't speak," he would write. "They're no use when it rains." Mena would await his trial without his cane, learning that the noise of footsteps in the corridor did not always come with reverence. In his room, Evaristo flexed his fingers like a musician. He would translate what came next, but knew that without the woman who had stood before everyone without a throat, a courtroom would be nothing more than a warehouse of broken voices. Isadora walked the empty hallway with the gavel hooked over her arm. Outside, the wind rose, and had the courtesy not to raise dust. She smelled earth and iron, and for just an instant, flour. She thought of Ulpiano doing his sums, thought of Remedios spreading the tablecloth tomorrow, thought of Matias telling stories with his fingers, thought of Simone learning not to seem indispensable. She wrote nothing on her slate. She shut the courtroom door without a sound. And for the first time since she was a girl, when the world fell silent around her, she felt that silence didn't take from her. It gave to her. The closing of a watch, 3 clicks and 1 dull. Time inside, at last serving something more than the owners of the metal.